The ground shook again as another explosion rocked the mining colony on Kepler 442b. Lisa Grant pressed her back against the cold metal wall of the emergency bunker, her heart racing as dust fell from the ceiling above. The lights flickered, casting strange shadows across the faces of the other survivors huddled in the underground shelter. "How many more hits can the shields take?" she asked Jake Martinez, the colony's communications officer. His face was pale. In the dim light, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool air in the bunker. "Maybe 6 hours at most," Jake replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "The Vexi are hitting us with everything they have. Our defense platforms are already gone." Lisa closed her eyes and tried to push down the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. She was the colony administrator responsible for the lives of 12,000 people who had come to this distant world to build a new life. They were miners, engineers, and families who had never expected to face a military assault from one of the galaxy's most feared pirate clans, the Vexi, had arrived 3 days ago without warning. Their ships had dropped out of hyperspace like vultures, surrounding the planet before anyone could react. They wanted the rare crystalline deposits that made Kepler 442b valuable, and they clearly didn't care about the people who lived there. "We need to send another distress signal," Lisa said, pushing herself away from the wall. "Someone has to be listening." Jake shook his head. "I've been broadcasting on all frequencies for the past 2 days. The nearest Allied Defense Force units are at least a week away. The Centauri Federation says they're sending help, but their ships won't arrive for 10 days. What about the independent contractors, the mercenary groups? They want payment up front, and we don't have that kind of money. Besides, most of them won't take on the Vexi. Too dangerous." Lisa felt her shoulders sag. The colony had been established in what was supposed to be a safe sector, far from the conflicts that plagued the inner worlds. They had basic defenses, nothing more than what was needed to deal with the occasional pirate raid or smuggler. No one had expected a full-scale assault from a clan as powerful as the Vexi. Another explosion, closer this time. The bunkers. Emergency lighting switched to red, and somewhere in the distance, Lisa could hear the sound of weapons fire. The Vexi ground forces were getting closer to the main settlement. "Send the signal again," she ordered. "Full-spectrum broadcast. Include our coordinates, our situation, and a request for immediate assistance." Jake's fingers moved across his console, encoding the message that would be transmitted across subspace to anyone who might be listening. The words were simple but desperate. "Mining colony under attack. 12,000 civilians in danger, requesting immediate military assistance." "Message sent," Jake reported. "Broadcasting on all emergency frequencies." Lisa nodded and turned to look at the other survivors in the bunker. There were 43 of them, mostly essential personnel who had been evacuated from the surface. When the attack began, she could see the fear in their eyes, the way they looked to her for answers she didn't have. "We're going to get through this," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "Help is coming." But even as she spoke the words, Lisa wasn't sure she believed them. The galaxy was a dangerous place, and small colonies like theirs were often left to fend for themselves. The major powers had their own problems to deal with, and the resources to mount a rescue mission were limited. The distress signal raced across subspace, carried by the invisible waves that connected star systems across the galaxy. It would reach the nearest inhabited worlds within hours, but those worlds had their own problems and their own priorities. Most would file the message away as another tragedy in the Outer Rim, something to be handled by the proper authorities when time and resources permitted, but the signal reached other ears as well. Deep in the Sol system, billions of miles from the desperate colonists on Kepler 442b, a human communications specialist named Amy Rodriguez was monitoring the emergency frequencies from her station aboard the orbital defense platform Cerberus. Amy had been working the night shift when the message came through. She almost dismissed it as routine traffic, another distress call from the frontier that would be handled by the appropriate agencies. But something about the urgency in the transmission made her pause. She read it again, noting the number of civilians involved and the identity of the attackers. the HFY. Even humans who were relatively new to the galactic community had heard of them. They were known for their brutality, their willingness to kill entire populations to get what they wanted. They had been responsible for the destruction of at least a dozen colonies over the past decade, and the major powers seemed unable or unwilling to stop them. Amy stood up from her console and walked across the command center to where Captain Danny Walsh was reviewing the night's intelligence reports. Walsh was a veteran of the Resource Wars, a man who had earned his command through combat rather than politics. His steel-gray eyes looked up as she approached. "Captain, we've got a situation," Amy said, handing him the printed copy of the distress signal. "Mining colony under attack by the HFY. 12,000 civilians." Danny read the message twice, his expression growing darker with each word. He had seen enough death and destruction in his career to know what the HFY would do to those colonists if they weren't stopped. The pirates didn't take prisoners and they didn't show mercy. "What's our response time to Kepler 442b?" he asked. Amy consulted her navigation charts. "The Nightfall can make it in 18 hours if we push her hard. But Captain, we're not a rescue ship. We're a warship." Danny looked at her with an expression that made Amy take a step back. There was something cold and dangerous in his eyes. Something that reminded her why Earth was classified as a death world by the galactic community. "Sometimes," Danny said quietly, "a warship is exactly what innocent people need." He turned and walked toward the communications station, his boots echoing in the quiet command center. Amy followed, watching as he activated the ship-wide intercom. "System, all hands, this is the captain. We have received a distress call from human civilians under attack by hostile forces. We will be departing in 1 hour. All personnel report to battle stations." Amy felt a chill run down her spine. She had served with Captain Walsh for 3 years, and she had never heard him use that tone of voice. It was the sound of a predator preparing to hunt. The UES Nightfall was not a rescue ship. It was humanity's most advanced warship, designed and built by a species that had spent millennia perfecting the art of warfare. Its crew was composed of volunteers who had proven themselves in the brutal conflicts that had shaped human history. They were soldiers, sailors, and Marines who understood that sometimes the only way to protect innocent life was to destroy those who threatened it. As the Nightfall prepared to depart, its crew worked with the efficiency of a machine built for war. They loaded weapons, checked systems, and prepared for a battle that would soon teach the galaxy a lesson about the price of threatening human civilians. The message had been received, and the Deathworlders were coming. The UES Nightfall cut through hyperspace like a knife through darkness, its hull black as the void around it and covered in scars from previous battles. Captain Danny Walsh stood on the bridge, his hands clasped behind his back as he watched the tactical display that showed their destination. Growing closer with each passing hour, the ship around him hummed with controlled energy. 800 crew members moved through the corridors with practiced efficiency, each one a veteran of conflicts that had forged humanity into something the galaxy had never seen before. These were soldiers who had survived the Resource Wars, the corporate rebellions, and the devastating conflicts that had nearly destroyed Earth decades ago. "Captain, we're receiving multiple communications from galactic peacekeeping vessels," reported Amy Rodriguez from her station. "They're advising us to stand down and wait for proper diplomatic channels." Danny's expression didn't change, but Amy could see the cold anger in his eyes. "Tell them humans don't do diplomacy when innocents are dying. We do results." The communications officer hesitated for a moment, then transmitted the message. Danny knew what the response would be. The galactic community operated on rules and procedures, committees, and negotiations. They would debate the proper response to the HFY attack while 12,000 people died waiting for help that would never come. Humans had tried to follow those rules when they first joined the galactic community. They had filed the proper reports, followed the correct procedures, and waited for the appropriate authorities to handle threats to human colonies. The result had been the massacre at New Toronto, where 15,000 colonists had been slaughtered while the Galactic Council debated the proper Response. Never again. Lieutenant Colonel Steve Murphy entered the bridge, his combat armor already sealed and ready for battle. The Marine commander was a big man, even by human standards, with hands that could crush steel and eyes that had seen too much death. Behind him followed a squad of his best Marines, their weapons checked and their faces grim. "What's the plan, Captain?" Steve asked, his voice distorted by the helmet speakers. Danny turned to face him, and Steve recognized the look in his commander's eyes. It was the same expression Danny had worn during the siege of Mars Station when they had held the line against impossible odds. It was the look of a man who had decided that some things were worth dying for. "We're going to do what humans do best," Danny replied. "We're going to remind the galaxy why they fear Deathworlders." The bridge fell silent except for the steady hum of the ship's engines. Every crew member understood what those words meant. They weren't going to Kepler 442b to negotiate or to attempt a rescue. They were going to war. The Nightfall's weapon systems came online with a sound like distant thunder. Particle cannons that could slice through most shields, kinetic impactors that struck with the force of small asteroids, and experimental plasma weapons that burned hotter than the surface of most stars. The ship's fighter bays opened, revealing rows of sleek combat craft piloted by men and women who had been trained in the brutal academies of Earth's military. "Dropping out of hyperspace in 60 seconds, announced the navigation officer. "All stations report ready for combat." Danny nodded and activated the ship-wide communication system. "All hands, this is the captain. We are about to engage a superior enemy force that has spent 3 days killing innocent people. They chose to prey on the weak because they thought no one would stop them. They were wrong." The ship shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442b system. Immediately, the tactical display lit up with contacts. 27 Vexi vessels surrounded the planet, their smaller raider ships darting between the larger cruisers like angry wasps. The colony's shields were failing, and debris from destroyed defensive platforms drifted in orbit. "My God," whispered Amy Rodriguez as she looked at the destruction. "They're not just attacking the colony, they're destroying everything." Danny's jaw tightened. The Vexi weren't just pirates. They were predators who enjoyed the kill as much as the prize. They would torture the colonists before they died, take the survivors as slaves, and strip the planet bare before moving on to their next target, the lead Vexi ship, a massive dreadnought that the intelligence files identified as the Bone Crusher, immediately hailed the approaching human vessel. The main screen flickered to life, showing the reptilian features of War Chief Kreshta, the clan leader whose reputation for cruelty was known throughout the galaxy. "So, the Deathworlders finally show themselves," Kreshta hissed, his forked tongue flicking out to taste the air. "One ship against my fleet? Your species is either brave or foolish." Danny stepped forward, his movements calm and controlled. Amy could see the rage burning in his eyes, but his voice was steady when he spoke. "We're neither brave nor foolish. We're something much worse. And what is that, human? We're thorough." The transmission cut off, and Danny turned to his weapons. "Officer, target their engines, not their reactors. I want survivors to carry word of what happens when you attack human civilians." The weapons officer, a young woman named Carol Davis, who had earned her position during the Martian campaign, nodded grimly. "Aye, Captain, engines only. All fighters, launch when ready. Marines, prep for boarding operations. All hands, remember what we're fighting for." The Nightfall began to move forward, accelerating toward the center of the Vexi formation. To any observer, it would have looked like suicide. One ship against 27, racing towards certain destruction. But the crew of the Nightfall had learned something during humanity's violent history that the galaxy had never understood. Sometimes the best defense was overwhelming offense. "Contact in 30 seconds, reported the tactical officer. "Enemy ships are moving to intercept." Danny watched the display as the Vexi vessels began to turn toward them. The pirates were confident, secure in their numerical superiority. They had destroyed entire fleets before, and they saw no reason why one human ship should be any different. They were about to learn why. Earth was classified as a death world. Fire, Danny ordered. The Nightfall's first salvo lit up the darkness. Of space like a miniature sun, particle beams lanced out across the void, striking the lead Vex-High cruiser with surgical precision. The ship's engines exploded in a cascade of fire and debris, sending it tumbling helplessly through space. "Direct hit," reported Carol Davis. "Enemy vessel disabled." "Next target," Danny ordered calmly. The battle had begun, and the galaxy was about to learn what happened when Deathworlders went to war. The Nightfall charged straight into the heart of the Vex-High formation, doing something that no civilized species would ever consider. Captain Danny Walsh had studied every file on the raiders that human intelligence could provide, and he understood their greatest weakness. They had never fought an enemy that viewed death as an acceptable price for victory. "All batteries, open fire," Danny commanded. "Launch all fighters, Marines, prepare for boarding operations." The human warship unleashed hell upon the Vex-High fleet. Weapons that had been designed by a species that spent thousands of years perfecting. The art of killing tore through enemy shields like paper. Particle cannons sliced through armor plating. Kinetic rounds struck with the force of meteors, and plasma bolts burned holes clean through enemy hulls. But the truly terrifying thing wasn't the weapons themselves. It was how the humans used them. While other species fought with honor and followed established rules of war, humans fought to win. They targeted life support systems, communications arrays, and navigation computers. They used the wreckage of destroyed ships as cover and turned the pirates' own aggressive tactics against them. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Brooks led his fighter squadron through the chaos with a skill that seemed impossible. His pilots had trained in the combat simulators of Earth's military academies, where failure meant death and success meant survival. They flew their ships like extensions of their own bodies, weaving between the massive capital ships and striking at weak points with deadly precision. "Reaper Squadron, this is Reaper Lead," Ryan's voice crackled over the communications system. "Remember, we're not here to fight fair, we're here to win." His fighters spread out across the battlefield, each pilot selecting targets with the cold efficiency of born predators. They didn't engage in honorable duels or follow the traditional rules of space combat. They struck from unexpected angles, used the enemy's own formations against them, and demonstrated a level of tactical flexibility that left the Vex-High reeling. The raiders had expected a conventional battle, but humans didn't fight conventionally. They used electronic warfare to turn the pirates' own systems against them, launched boarding pods at disabled ships, and coordinated their attacks with a precision that spoke of countless hours of brutal training. War Chief Kreshta stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching his fleet being torn apart by tactics he couldn't understand. His ships were stronger, his crews more experienced, and his numbers far superior. By all the laws of warfare, he should have been winning. Instead, he was watching his vessels die one by one. "What manner of species are these humans?" he demanded of his tactical officer, his claws digging into the metal of his command chair. The officer, a veteran of dozens of raids, stared at his display with obvious fear. "Sir, they're not following any known rules of engagement. They're targeting our life support systems, our communications, our navigation computers. They're fighting like predators." On the surface of Kepler 442b, Administrator Lisa Grant watched the battle through the colony's emergency sensors. The human ship moved through the Vex-High fleet like a shark through a school of fish, leaving destruction in its wake. But it wasn't random destruction. Every shot was calculated, every maneuver planned, every attack designed to achieve maximum damage with minimum waste. "They're not trying to drive them off," she whispered to Jake Martinez, who was monitoring the communications channels. "They're trying to destroy them all." Jake nodded, his face pale in the dim light of the bunker. "The humans aren't conducting a rescue operation, they're conducting an extermination." Above them, the battle continued with a brutality that shocked even the hardened Vex-High pirates. The Nightfall's Marines launched boarding pods at disabled enemy vessels. storming aboard with weapons that fired rounds designed to penetrate any known armor. They moved through the corridors of pirate ships like death incarnate, showing no mercy to those who had shown none to innocent colonists. Lieutenant Colonel Steve Murphy led the assault on the Vex-High cruiser Blood Fang, his combat armor scarred by enemy fire but still functioning. Behind him, his Marines advanced with the steady rhythm of soldiers who had fought in the worst conflicts humanity had ever known. They cleared each corridor methodically, their weapons speaking in the harsh language of war. "Sector 7 clear," reported Sergeant Linda Hayes over the communications system. "Moving to Sector 8. The Vex-High crew fought desperately, but they were facing an enemy unlike anything they had encountered before. These weren't the soft species of the core worlds who fought with restraint and followed rules of engagement. These were Deathworlders, forged in the fires of a planet so hostile that only the strongest and most adaptable could survive. Back on the Nightfall's bridge, Danny watched the tactical display with grim satisfaction. 15 Vex-High ships had been destroyed or disabled, and the rest were beginning to show signs of panic. Their formations were breaking down, their coordination failing, and their legendary discipline crumbling under the relentless human assault. "Captain, enemy flagship is requesting communication," reported Amy Rodriguez. Danny considered for a moment, then nodded. "Put them through." War Chief Kreshta appeared on the main screen. His reptilian features twisted with rage and something that might have been fear. "Human captain, you fight without honor. You target civilians, you ignore the rules of war, you show no mercy to defeated enemies." Danny's expression didn't change. "You're right. We don't fight with honor when facing those who have none. We don't follow rules when fighting those who break them. And we show no mercy to those who prey on the innocent. We are warriors," Kreshta hissed. "We follow the ancient codes of battle." "You're pirates," Danny replied coldly. "You attack the defenseless, you kill the innocent, and you prey on those who cannot fight back. You forfeited any claim to honor when you began this assault." The transmission flickered as another explosion rocked the Vex-High flagship. The Bloodfang had been completely overrun by human Marines, and the remaining pirate vessels were fighting a losing battle against an enemy that seemed to anticipate their every move. "Sir," called out Carol Davis from the weapons station, "enemy formation is beginning to collapse. Several ships are attempting to flee." Danny's smile was cold as winter. "Let them run. But make sure they carry word of what happens when you threaten human civilians." The battle was turning into a rout, and the galaxy was about to learn a harsh lesson about the price of underestimating Deathworlders. By the 4th hour of combat, the space around Kepler 442b looked like a graveyard of broken dreams and shattered metal. The Vex-High fleet that had arrived with such confidence 3 days ago was now scattered wreckage drifting in the planet's orbit. Of the 27 ships that had besieged the mining colony, only 8 remained capable of flight, and those were fleeing as fast as their damaged engines could carry them. Captain Danny Walsh stood on the bridge of the Nightfall, watching the tactical display with the calm satisfaction of a predator that had successfully defended its territory. His ship bore the scars of battle, with scoring along the hull and damage to several weapon systems, but nothing that couldn't be repaired. More importantly, the threat to the innocent colonists below had been eliminated. "Captain, we're receiving a priority transmission from the Vex-High flagship," reported Amy Rodriguez, her voice tight with exhaustion. The communications officer had been at her station for 6 straight hours, coordinating the complex dance of human fighters and monitoring enemy communications. Danny straightened his uniform and nodded. "Put War Chief Kreshta through." The main screen flickered to life, showing the reptilian pirate leader in what was clearly the wreckage of his command bridge. Sparks flew from damaged consoles behind him, and the acrid smell of burning electronics seemed to seep through the transmission itself. The arrogance that had marked his earlier communications was gone, replaced by something that looked very much like desperation. "Human captain," Kreshta began, his voice hoarse and strained, "I propose an immediate ceasefire. My remaining ships will withdraw from this system, and you will allow us to depart without further interference." Danny was quiet for a long moment. studying the alien's face with the patience of someone who had seen enough war to understand its true cost. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. You attacked a colony of 12,000 innocent civilians. You killed children who had never held a weapon. You thought you could prey on the weak because they had no one to protect them. We will pay reparations, Kreshta said quickly, his reptilian eyes darting nervously as another explosion shook his flagship. We will compensate the families of those who died. We will provide medical supplies, reconstruction materials, whatever you demand. Reparations? Danny stepped closer to the screen, and Amy could see the cold fury burning in his commander's eyes. You think you can buy your way out of this with money and supplies? You think the lives you've taken can be balanced with credits and cargo? The war chief's forked tongue flicked out nervously. Name your price, human. Surely we can reach some accommodation between civilized beings. Danny's laugh was harsh and bitter. Civilized beings don't murder children for profit. Civilized beings don't torture civilians for entertainment. You forfeited any claim to civilization when you chose to prey on the innocent. Then what do you want? Kreshta demanded, his fear finally breaking through the facade of diplomatic calm. What will it take for you to let us go? Danny was silent for several seconds, and the bridge of the nightfall became so quiet that Amy could hear her own heartbeat. When the captain finally spoke, his words fell like hammer blows. I want you to understand something fundamental about humanity. We don't negotiate with murderers. We don't bargain with those who harm the defenseless. We eliminate threats to innocent life. The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving the bridge in darkness except for the glow of the tactical displays. Danny turned to his weapons officer, a young woman whose steady hands had guided the ship's guns through the entire battle with devastating precision. Carol, finish it, he ordered quietly. The weapons officer nodded, her face grim with understanding. Aye, Captain. All remaining enemy vessels locked and loaded. The final phase of the battle was swift and merciless. The fleeing Vexai ships tried desperately to escape, but the Nightfall's fighters were faster, its weapons had longer range, and its crew possessed a patience born of a species that had survived by being the ultimate predator in their environment. One by one, the remaining pirate vessels were hunted down and destroyed. The cruiser Stormbringer died when human fighters overwhelmed its point defense systems and struck its reactor with surgical precision. The raider Blood Moon lasted longer, its crew fighting with the desperation of cornered animals, but eventually succumbed to a boarding action led by Lieutenant Colonel Steve Murphy's Marines. The flagship Bonecrusher War Chief Kreshta S. Pride and Joy was the last to fall, its hull cracking open like an egg under the concentrated fire of the Nightfall's main guns when the shooting stopped. The silence that followed was profound. The space around Kepler 442b was filled with drifting wreckage and the slowly expanding clouds of gas and debris that marked the graves of the Vexai clan. Not a single pirate vessel remained intact, and not a single enemy crew member had survived. To carry word of their defeat to other raiders on the colony surface, Administrator Lisa Grant emerged from the emergency bunker for the first time in 3 days. The skies above Kepler 442b were clear and peaceful, marked only by the distant glint of the human warship maintaining its protective orbit. Around her, other survivors began to emerge from their shelters, blinking in the sunlight and trying to process what had just happened. "They saved us," she said to Jake Martinez, who was standing beside her with a portable communications unit in his hands. "But the way they fought, Jake, it was like watching death itself." Jake nodded slowly, monitoring the electromagnetic spectrum for any sign of remaining threats. "I'm picking up communications from across the sector, Lisa. It's spreading fast about what happened here. The Vexai clan isn't just defeated, it's gone. Completely eliminated." Lisa looked up at the stars where she knew the human ship continued its silent vigil. The crew of the Nightfall had saved her people, but they had done it in a way that defied everything she thought she knew about galactic civilization. They hadn't negotiated, hadn't sought a political solution, hadn't tried to minimize casualties or preserve enemy lives. They had simply identified a threat to innocent people and eliminated it with ruthless efficiency. What kind of species are they? She whispered. Jake was quiet for a moment, then spoke with the voice of someone who had witnessed something that would change his understanding of the universe forever. They're Deathworlders, Lisa, and I think the galaxy is about to learn what that really means. Above them, rescue shuttles began descending from the nightfall, carrying medical supplies, emergency personnel, and Marines whose gentle hands with civilian casualties stood in stark contrast to their deadly efficiency in battle. The message was clear to anyone watching. Humanity protected those who asked for help, and the price for threatening human civilians was complete and utter destruction. 3 weeks after the Battle of Kepler 442b, the galaxy was still trying to understand what had happened in that distant star system. The complete destruction of the Vexhai clan had sent shockwaves through every criminal organization, pirate, fleet, and opportunistic government in known space. The message was simple and terrifying. Humanity protected its own, and apparently anyone who asked for help qualified as their own. Admiral Kate Hudson sat in her office aboard the orbital station, Cerberus reviewing reports that streamed in from across human space and beyond. The holographic displays around her desk showed communication logs, intelligence briefings, and diplomatic messages that painted a picture of a galaxy in transition. The old rules were changing, and everyone was scrambling to understand what the new ones would be. The Kepler incident has changed everything, she told Captain Danny Walsh, who had returned from his patrol of the Outer Rim systems just hours before. We're no longer just another species trying to find our place in the galaxy. The other races are looking at us as the solution to problems their own governments can't or won't handle. Danny accepted a cup of coffee from the Admiral's aide and settled into the chair across from her desk. His uniform was clean and pressed, but Kate could see the weariness in his eyes. The weight of what he and his crew had done was something that would stay with them forever, even if they had saved 12,000 innocent lives. Are we ready for that kind of responsibility? He asked, taking a sip of the bitter coffee that had sustained human military forces for centuries. Kate activated a holographic display that showed the current galactic situation. Red markers indicated areas of conflict, yellow showed regions of instability, and green marked the slowly expanding zones where human influence was beginning to make itself felt. Ready or not, it's already happening. The Hegemony Council has formally requested our assistance with the Kryn separatist movement. The Centauri Trade Federation wants us to provide escort services for their merchant vessels. The Andromedans are asking if we'd be willing to train their military forces in what they call human tactical doctrine. The impact of humanity's response to the Kepler crisis had been swift and profound. Captain Danny Walsh had become a legend throughout the galaxy, his name whispered in fear by criminals and spoken with reverence by those who valued peace over profit. The UES Nightfall had been refitted with the latest human military technology and assigned to permanent patrol duties. Its crew volunteers who understood that they were now the sharp edge of human diplomacy. But the most significant change was in how other species viewed humanity itself. The fear was still there, stronger than ever since Earth's classification as a death world had been proven accurate in the most dramatic way possible. But now that fear was tempered with respect and, in many cases, desperate hope. The galaxy had learned that while humans were indeed dangerous, they were dangerous in defense of the innocent rather than in pursuit of conquest. Lieutenant Commander Amy Rodriguez, recently promoted after her exemplary service during the Kepler battle, brought the latest intelligence reports to Admiral Hudson's attention. Ma'am, we're tracking a significant decrease in pirate activity across 12 sectors. The remaining criminal organizations are actively avoiding systems with human populations or protection agreements. How significant? Kate asked, though. She suspected she already knew the answer. 87% reduction in reported attacks, Amy replied, consulting her datapad. And the attacks that are happening are against targets that have specifically refused human protection offers. Danny set down his coffee cup and leaned forward. They're learning the lesson we taught them at Kepler. The hard way, But they're learning. Kate nodded and turned her attention back to the holographic display. The problem is that our success is creating new challenges. Every species in the galaxy is watching us now, trying to figure out what we want and how far we're willing to go to get it. What do we want? Danny asked quietly. It was a question that had been debated in the halls of human government for weeks since the Kepler incident. Some politicians wanted to use humanity's newfound reputation to expand human influence and territory. Others argued for a more cautious approach, concerned that too much aggression might unite the galaxy against Earth. But for the military officers who had actually faced the reality of galactic politics, the answer was simpler. We want to go home at night knowing that innocent people are safe, Kate replied. We want children to grow up without fear of pirates and slavers. We want the strong to protect the weak instead of preying on them. Amy cleared her throat softly. Admiral, there's something else you should know. Intelligence reports suggest that the Outer Rim Trading Company is using slave labor in the Proxima Belt mining operations. They've ignored 3 formal protests from the Galactic Council and 2 warnings from the Centauri Federation. Danny's expression darkened, and Kate recognized the look in his eyes. It was the same cold fury that had driven him to destroy the Vexi clan completely rather than simply driving them away from Kepler 442b. How many slaves? Estimated 40,000 sentient beings from 17 different species, Amy replied, including approximately 8,000 children. The office fell silent except for the hum of the station's life support systems. Kate looked at Danny and saw him reach the same conclusion she had already come to. The galaxy was watching humanity, waiting to see what they would do when faced with another atrocity against innocent life. The Nightfall's next patrol begins. In 6 hours? Kate said quietly. I assume you'll want to investigate these reports personally. Danny stood up, straightening his uniform with the unconscious precision of a career military officer. The trading company had their chance to do the right thing. 3 formal protests should have been enough for any civilized organization. As word of the Nightfall's next mission began to spread through the communication networks, the galaxy watched and waited once again. The humans had established a new precedent at Kepler 442b, a distress call to Earth. Wouldn't bring supply ships filled with humanitarian aid and medical personnel. It would bring warships filled with soldiers who viewed the protection of innocent life as a sacred duty worth dying for. In the depths of space, slave traders and pirates began to realize that humanity's emergence had fundamentally altered the balance of power. The Deathworlders had arrived, and they had brought with them a simple but terrifying message that echoed across the stars: harm the innocent and face the consequences. The galaxy would never be the same, and perhaps that was exactly what it needed.